for that is to go through the short-term rental, which was already referred to us, and we did a lot of edits on it the past time. My whole feeling on this is, please, can we just get something passed? So I did get some input from Rick and Zorian. I had some small input. You can see a lot of what we put in the last time, which was the more major. They included everything, which was nice. My comment that I have here on the exception use of alternative dwelling structure. So it says the alternative dwelling structure shall conform with the density requirements for the parcel zoning district. And it's just a, I'm not sure, maybe they need to clarify this better. And so does that mean, I gave the example, let's say you have 6 acres in an R2 zoning, you have to have a single family house there, have to have a resident by this law. Does that mean you get 2 RVs or 2 Airstreams because the density is 1 house per 2 acres? I don't quite know what the density is for travel trailers and campers. So that was my one addition, that maybe they could make that clearer.
I'm not entirely sure that anything that's on wheels actually qualifies as how that works. My understanding is if it's got wheels and you move it at least once a year or something like that, then it doesn't count.
I know, that's why.
So we want to say something like, if you're using an alternative dwelling structure in this way, it counts as a principal use towards density requirements.
Yeah, I think that would be a good upgrade.
Right, because that's what they're trying to say, but it's a little, right, if you just drive them all the way and you drive new ones back on, it doesn't. So say that again then.
I said if a alternative dwelling structure is used for short-term rental, it shall be considered a primary use and count towards density requirements, something like that. Or for the purposes of density requirements, it shall be considered a principal use.
You're gonna have to get Mary Lou to write that one.
Yeah, we will, but they didn't catch it here because she sort of went through this already. Do the second choice again, Sam. You gotta like
say if an alternative dwelling structure is used as a short-term rental, then for the purposes of density requirements, it shall be considered a principal use, or it shall be counted as a principal use towards density. It's hard to know which clause is easier to put first.
Basically, we want it to add as another one, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then my only comment on this law was actually on this same section, which was that I really don't like the idea of this requiring a special use permit and coming in front of the planning board.
Oh, it could be like the planning board overwhelming disaster.
Yeah, also, if they're going to allow it, then they should allow it just on the technical criteria as everything else. Like, it's like how, I don't know, it just seemed weird, and it seemed like a nightmare for review.
It seems like a complete nightmare for review. I mean, I think they wanted to try and limit it more because they didn't really want to have them. The first brush of this, Mark, you weren't here, I mean, especially the code enforcement officer is adamantly against these things because they end up being abused. You have sewer problems, septic problems, and
then they just abandon them and they rot.
Exactly. And I guess I was not on the, I mean, I didn't listen to when they were mulling this over at the town board level. This must have been like a attempt to make it as restrictive as possible. People won't want to do it, but still give them the ability to do it, because I think a lot of the public chimed in because they love doing these Airstream things right now.
Which is fine, but they need to be limited, and we can put them on our agenda for like, midnight.
I was going to say, and we have a special new clause that all of these guys always go last.
That's right. I love it.
Well, it sort of gets at the point that I mentioned to you this afternoon about they talk about when it's an RV type structure, it needs to have, what was the term they used? Permanent water and septic. And
Yeah, I added that in.
I question, well, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, but isn't there an issue at the campground too, where you can't stay for a long period of time at the campground, and that was where that water issue came in? Because they have the permanent water and sewer, but then they're telling them you can't stay at the campground longer than 90 days or whatever it is.
That was that 1 year thing. You got to move them once a year.
You had to move it, right?
Right.
Yeah, the term they use is internal water and septic system, and
Right.
I just
So
asked the question, what does internal water and an internal septic system mean?
It means you have a tank for sewage and you have a tank for fresh water. You're not tied in.
I said on this that they need to clarify it more. They need to define it. You have an independent internal water and septic system. Is this, as you said, Rick, a hose attached to the RV, or is it a fully functional real water system you hook into, or is it just what you do with an RV? You pump the bilge basically periodically.
Yeah.
You've got septic in there or a tank, and which do they mean by what is? And it's not in definitions. Independent. I mean, they have to put it in. Where's our definitions?
Just put it in the definitions.
Yeah.
Or if they deliberately want to leave it undefined.
When exactly going to have to. So what if we do?
This is what they do. People will just buy property, drag an Airstream on it, leave it here, and come 3 or 4 or 5 times a year.
That's exactly right.
That's what they'll do. Yeah.
Which you're not allowed to do, because if you have which they do specify in here. Let's say one of us bought a lot. You're allowed to stay there for 30 days. So you basically can drag something in for the idea of while you're, planning your. It's basically so you don't limit somebody. They were doing something, they can put one of the trailers as a developer or
which is okay. That's a fine. Yeah.
But then it's getting around to find all these people to drag it in. It's possession is 3/4 of the law, whatever the saying is. They stick it in there. They don't leave after 30 days, and they just keep camping. So let's put in. That they have that, and they should try maybe we'll leave the question as it is here. What are they trying to get at? And then on this, I think maybe we should say something in the letter, or just we can put it in here. Do they really need to come before? Because that's before the planning board.
It should just
be because if they don't,
right?
I agree with Sam. I wouldn't want to see this if they choose not to define what internal water and septic system means, because then it's
here
depending upon whether we get it at 6 o'clock or at midnight, we might define it differently. So
a vacant property which does not contain residential dwelling unit, you can't do. You have to do the campground use. So you have to do a full campground. Fine, they go on campground, and we don't even have to deal. At least our stuff, they can do a campground. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not familiar with how great our campground stuff is, but alternative dwelling structures.
So, Maren, I have a question. Here's before you read that. Is say I were to buy a piece of property that has an old trailer on it. I drag the trailer off, and now I have well and septic. Can I drag my Airstream on it, and it's permanent because
No, from the way this reads, you have to have a real permanent residence there. So you have to have a residence.
So the trailer stays.
That's not considered a residence. Okay. The trailer, when it's like that, is not considered a residence. Has to have by building code, a real foundation.
Right.
So you could drag it off and you drag it back on. You're still out of compliance there. You got to build yourself a real house. Then you could drag the damn thing back on and use it. Try to get this a special use permit under this now to do it. So.
Yeah, it just felt like they should either allow it or not allow it.
Well, that's how it was before, and that's why they are. Should we just say that we think you should just allow it or not allow it and stop dancing around it? But
yeah, I mean, because you're not allowed to do it. Like if I want to have a trailer in my yard and have someone living in it, not as a short-term transient rental, I'm not allowed to do that. So
No.
why would I be allowed to do, why would you allow something more permissive with a short-term transient rental than you're allowing with a permanent, you know, rental? Or not, obviously it's not a permanent rental, but like with a longer term rental. And if they want to allow it, you know, then what, it just seems like a nightmare for a review criteria, because all the kind of neighborhood characteristic standards, all of that stuff, it's just.
I think additionally, this is trying to avoid people who own a camper renting it out.
Exactly. They're trying to cover too many things under one code, and definitely whenever you try to torture it to try to let something happen, the idea is people complain they want to have airstreams, so they're trying to find a way to twist it in, and it's not very elegant. So.
Right, and if they're going to allow it and they say, you know, it has to meet these federal standards of fire prevention or whatever it is, National Fire Protection Association, like then it's just an administrative approval, just like the rest of it. But this kind of in-between thing, it just seems, it seems inelegant. It also seems like going through public hearings, all the review criteria. I mean, maybe that's why they want to do it this way, but I don't like it.
I think that's why they want to make it so onerous that people don't want to do it. But if people do start coming, the planning board will be bogged down. And I mean, the people doing it right now. So the first guys that are doing it right now probably want to keep it because they're going to have to do an initial permit. Well, for us, it'll be living hell of going through these permits. So.
Hey, Maren?
Yeah.
What number did Mike come up with? I don't know. It was maybe 6 months ago or something. I don't know. Some meeting we were in where the number of short-term rentals or Airbnbs in this town was something on the order of 5,000 or 10,000.
No, I looked up, there's a thing called AirDNA, which tracks Airbnb type short-term rentals. And we have about, Accord is even, I can pull the spreadsheet up, Accord's even higher. I want to say almost a quarter of all the properties are short-term rentals. And the Kerhonkson part of it, it's in the low teens. So let's just say we're at, 17% of our housing stock is short-term rentals.
For all of the town of Rochester, is that what you're suggesting, Mayor?
Of all of the town of Rochester, if you combine the two, it's exactly about, it's high teens, call it 16, 17% of the houses here are short-term rentals. So
Is that, what about is it owners living in, or we don't know yet?
No, this is trying to, we don't know I don't know that stat. I didn't look it up, and AirDNA didn't have it. This is trying to make it that you either have to live in it or you have to be living there in the residence, or there's a limit of the number of properties you can have if you're not there. So they added that in, which I think is quite good.
2%, yeah. Every year revised.
Right. But this exactly is, I mean, this is our, you know what, let's look at the other things that, well, you said, Zoran, there's really not a lot else here. Maybe we just come back to this and I open up a new document and we compose something better. Hey, Rick had this special use permit we need to use. This, I think they need to address, as you said, and make a, what exactly that means. But I can just see people having a bunch of these. They don't clean out the septic part of it, and you've got 3 of them because you've got the density, and it becomes a raw sewage disaster, which is exactly why Jerry, the code enforcement officer, didn't want these, because that's what ends up happening with them. They become a health disaster unless you've got a real foundation and you're attached to a real well and septic. What else did?
So Maren, the way to beat this, I'm just trying to think about how to beat this, right? Devil's advocate here. So say I have a house well and septic, no problem. I have a camper in the yard that I use, that's mine, and I want to rent the camper out as a short-term rental. I have well and septic. I just need to apply for a permit and we can't say no.
I think the bug is gonna be this definition that is here that they haven't defined well, independent internal water and septic systems. So they're gonna have to show that not that the RV just sits there, but that RV has whatever this is.
Hey, Lauren,
Yes,
in my head, an RV, it has an independent water and septic system, the storage tank and the septic tank.
yep.
So that meets the code. So how are they thinking that we're applying this to a groundwater source, both to get water out of and for the septic to be dispersed into?
Well, that's what I was just saying. If I had a well and septic on my property and I have it connected, hard connected, if you want to call it that, I meet the requirement. I can't imagine it's very difficult to do.
Right. That would be meeting the requirement if you hard connect it, but it's unclear saying, I mean, the
Right,
vehicle has independent internal water and septic system. It just means that you bought a nice new RV that's functional. You don't have an old crappy RV.
Right.
So this doesn't solve, do these guys run it poorly? And, they've
I
got
agree.
non-potable water in it and they don't clean out the septic after every person comes or every 10th person whenever you need to.
Maybe
I
actually
agree
the
totally.
alternative is it has, instead of has an internal water and septic, maybe the requirement should be it has to be tied into a permanent water and septic system.
Yeah, but it's not
Go
easy to
totally
do
in the
it.
other direction.
It becomes too complex. It's better to have independent system.
But then it's not an RV sort of, which gets around the fact that
Right.
we don't actually allow RVs as a normal use.
Exactly. I mean, you're doing exactly what you're biasing it toward these short-term rental people when you could never go and do this and get the density and have somebody living in an RV in your yard with their independent septic. That wouldn't be allowed.
Right. Well, that's why I think on a normative level, I'm opposed to it. But if the town board wants to do it,
Right.
but like, I think maybe my comment would be take this whole thing out. Like, why are you allowing something to happen for this use that's not allowed for a residential use here? It's like,
Well, Sam,
clearly
what
not
you're
an
essentially
accessory.
saying is if I wanted my son and his wife to move in and I had an RV here, they couldn't do it because
Right.
it violates density.
Unless it was hard pumped and
Well,
connected.
No, not under normal circumstances, you couldn't do that.
Oh, I see. Correct.
All right. So what Sam is saying, correct me, Sam, if I'm wrong. What Sam is saying, if I wouldn't allow it under quote unquote normal circumstances, why would I allow it under the short-term thing?
Right.
Which for the most part doesn't become short-term. It's from as soon as the weather gets good and the lines won't freeze until they do freeze. So
Right.
April through October, November. So I lean towards Sam to say either change, which is a problem, change the density requirement as it stands now for a second family, which I wouldn't want to do, or don't allow this.
Well, I think, sorry, my battery's running low on I think maybe what we should say here is we don't agree with allowing this because of the fact it is the detriment of people. Obviously, we're not changing, we cannot suggest to change the density requirements here, but saying that this doesn't.
Yeah, this modification of the
jive with
law
what we allow.
doesn't jive with adopted land use plans. Like,
Exactly.
we're not adding nuance. You're actually like creating a whole new use that's not allowed under typical circumstances. It seems weird to allow an accessory use to do something that is not allowed as a primary use.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you're right, because it would be impossible to check is that somebody saying 30 days or 45 or 60.
Right.
And I think everybody can acknowledge some street in our area that has a lot of delinquent campers all around the area where they, the code enforcement officer has enough to do. I think this is
Right.
Yeah,
added baggage personally.
Yeah, it can be a campground. I mean, it's like we do have a way in the code to build
The only way you
temporary
can do it
RV parks.
is through a campground. So it's allowing an accessory use that is not allowed. I don't know how to really write this. It's gonna have to be
It's
sort
not
of,
allowed as a principal use or a primary use. Or specifically allowing the alternative dwelling structures as an accessory use when it's not allowed as a primary use. When there's no possible way to use these same structures for a primary use, seems like it's in tension with adopted land use rules and would pose a regulatory burden on the code enforcement officer and be challenging to apply special use permit review to. That was clunky.
The thing is none of them would pass special use review.
exactly.
You wouldn't get any of them through it.
So, which is sort of what they're trying to do, but that's ridiculous because there are a lot of these to add that. Well, I think it's ridiculous.
Well, that was to my point of the number of these things, whereas if they want all of these people who are looking to do this, I mean, we're talking about thousands, literally thousands of applications for special use permits for this.
What happened to people just wanting to sleep in a tent? They don't do that anymore?
They aren't allowed to do exactly, but they aren't allowed to do that either.
Right.
As it is currently, because of the fact that you don't have, it's the water and septic kind of thing, that if you want to do that, then you do a campground where you can go to the whatever that is thing, the port, the place where you have the showers and the toilets kind of place there. And so and that, so you've got the place that everybody, this allows it. So, as Jerry said, no tent, because people are going to the bathroom all over the place, going in the streams, going on, it could be a complete free for all. So let me see if I know exactly, I agree with everybody. If I can phrase this better so we don't sit and do it live and send it out to everybody and then do the typical fix it, you guys add stuff, and then just send it back to me so we're not quoruming. And then we could use that as our letter is everything, pretty much things look good except this one piece doesn't work because you're letting someone do something that you can't do regularly. So it's what Becky Paddock Stang always said, we have pieces of the code that go against each other. And this would be going against what other people can do, which thus makes it.
And specifically, Martin, if we want the reference, it's 140-13E, which is the chapter on accessory structures and uses. And 140-13E says, railroad boxcars, manufactured home units, and recreational vehicles shall not be used for purposes of accessory or principal structures in connection with any use. So that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
So how could we give a special use permit for something that's specifically, articulated as not being permitted? Which
could be their goal, but then this is always my bug, that you put that in there and then the planning board ends up the bad guy because you say no. And then the Bluestone Press is full of, oh my God, we're the bad guys. And everybody's like the planning board stops everything, which is the town board should just have the cojones to step up and say, no, we can't, right? Take the problem at the source. We can't do this. Not let's.
Well, the alternative is Steve Fornell can become a permanent contributor to the Bluestone Press.
Already is. Steve Fornell can just run the planning board.
He's got his own byline. What are you kidding me?
He used to run it and did a great job, but he won't stand up. He won't salute the flag or whatever, so he's not allowed to do it anymore.
Wow.
That's the All right,
Mayor,
so
I trust whatever you write. I mean, essentially, you don't have to get, well, it's up to you how you want to handle it. But whatever you say, it's essentially, you're saying no over here to the primary use, but you're saying yes
saying
over
yes over
here.
here. And it goes
And, oh,
completely,
and by the way, you're not defining this good enough. And in many cases, the planning board is going to wind up having to play solemn, and
right.
we don't, in this case, we just don't want to do it.
I think I think the main problem, I mean, well, there's a number of problems, but in my personal opinion, the main problem is just going to be the sheer volume of this.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, for planning board and also to many people in the area.
So Maren, what are we gonna do if the town board comes back to us and says, well, please define what a special use permit will consist of then? We might want to be ready for that.
They probably won't on this one. They'll probably take our comments under advice and make their final decision.
Gotcha,
So
okay.
we'll either be stopped and we'll end up doing it, or they'll say, yeah, we see the point, because this has already been through multiple rounds. I think this is the last round of, okay, maybe we need to fix this.
The special use permit applications are reviewed at 1 a.m. and you must be present.
Exactly. We'll be taking a break and having a nap, and we'll be coming back for you guys for your Airstreams at 1 a.m.
That's right.
And you must be there. Yes, you cannot sign off to somebody else.
And you better have a slab under that Airstream.
Exactly. All right, so I have that and that. What else was? The one thing, Zorian had a comment here that this is easier for them to define. So the way it works, and Jerry wanted to set this up, when you're renewing, you can only do it during a certain piece of time. So this end of, it's basically October through November. So everybody has to renew right then so they can do it all at once. They aren't floating around all year round. The first time you come in for your first application, it appears you can do it whenever, you have your first application, is maybe making that clearer here. Maybe they don't really need to. It's not a crucial thing, but people might not know that they can apply in their very first time. They can apply in April, they can apply in September. But when you do the renewal, it has to be in the specific renewal part. This is another one that was a little, Zorian brought this up. I'm not touching these big spaces. The whole thing blows up. But in parking, the number of off-street parking spaces to be provided shall be stated on the application. Off-street parking shall be provided to accommodate the occupancy of the short-term transient rental unit, one space for each sleeping room on the dwelling, plus other parking as required by the town of Rochester zoning code. And my question there is, who looks at that? If you have got a single family dwelling, you have to have 2 parking spaces provided for.
Now you're asking for Jerry to do more.
Right. Who checks, and how much? Do they all need ADA? I mean, I don't know. Do they need?
This is just a fundamental issue with short-term transient rentals and Airbnb, which, I mean, that's my bugaboo, but.
Yeah, I agree. I'd just get rid of them entirely. Do a bed and breakfast if you want to do it. So I just maybe bring that up to them to see that they thought. I mean, they added this in so you could have another layer of scrutiny. But yeah, we've got 2 guys running around. They're going to be running around making sure that you have a screening buffer and permeable paving for a.
I mean, probably they should write it as like the part of the inspection will be confirmation that there is adequate parking, to the best judgment of the CEO or something like that.
Right,
something. I mean, they should make it less specific and more discretionary. Probably.
Well, if it needs to be inspected to begin with to get the permit, then that can be part of the inspection, right?
Right, but normally you're saying like the same as with a single family home with just a building permit, they need 2 parking spaces. So it's like, okay, now you need 6. Jerry can just be like, check that box, you've got 6, you're fine.
Right.
And the same thing, like when you go to the campground, you get a certain amount of cars allowed to go to your site.
Exactly.
So maybe there should be a permit fee for each vehicle that you have or something along those lines. I don't know.
I would love to be able to do that. We never collect enough money off of this stuff. So I guess you could make it that it isn't he's driving around looking at it. It's in the permitting process that the 140 parking will be looked at along with the extra parking spaces for each one of these sleeping rooms. So they could add something along at permitting adequacy of parking shall be determined by the C. Probably put it up higher here somewhere on the top and say it'll be determined, there. And then, I don't think he's going to have the time to do any of this, but anything else that was like, this Zorian cot, it says no outdoor camping shall be allowed unless the owner has a valid special use permit, because otherwise we're contradicting ourselves and saying you can do this if you have a special use permit. Or is outdoor camping a tent stuff, which isn't allowed, but an RV is not outdoor camping?
Well, hang on. What happens if I want to camp in my own RV on my own property? Do I need a special use permit?
No, all of that is it's as long as you are renting it out in a short term. This all just applies everything we're looking at here in the short-term rental procedure. Just like the definitions that are here are specific to short-term rentals.
Short-term rental, okay.
So that becomes do they define camping? See, here they say camping, the use of a site for sleeping outside or the parking of travel trailer, similar equipment, like erection of tents, serve as a temporary residence. So now they're saying you can get an approval.
140-23 is called recreational vehicles, campgrounds, and RV parks. Section A, bullet 1, no person, partnership, association, LLC, or other corporation being the owner, user, operator, or occupant of any land within the town of Rochester shall use or allow the use of such land for a campground or RV park or any other form of camping regulated herein unless a permit has been obtained and herein provided. I mean, that seems to me like excessively strict, but it's what's there. I mean, that sounds to me like you can't let your neighbors, friends, have an overnight in your yard would be like a strict interpretation of that, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, really.
It seems bonkers,
grandkids pitch a tent is kind of
right. No one's going to enforce that, obviously, unless there's some other issue. But again, it's like if you're going to say, basically you can't do it without a camping permit. So why is it then here?
The funny thing is, like, that's half of the town of Rochester in the summer when they have their, people have cousins come up. There's, hey, throw your RV on my land. And people do it all the time. But the thing is, can you still do it as a private residence, or is this just for people Airbnb-ing,
Well, on this that we're talking about, it's only for the short-term rental guys. So that other code you just read is another issue of, if we had 90 million code enforcement officers, they could go run around saying, don't let your cousin camp on your ground, but that you're
that's not going to happen in the town of Rochester.
That's not going to happen, right? But this is just for, and once again, you're having the problem here that by allowing this Airbnb portion of it, it's going against other laws. The whole problem here is you have laws fighting each other. So I think what you just said, Sam, that, if you're saying that you can't, I think somewhere in here it said you can't, you can't camp in a tent for short-term rentals. But you can put these trailers up. So they just need to look at this. we can say, because it's contradictory, there's no outdoor camping is allowed, but outdoor camping is not defined, if that means you just tent only, and when you look at their camping definition, it means tent and trailer. So that should be brought up, and that's pretty much so it pretty much comes down to all of everything that was a lot cleaner before, because none of this was in there. It comes down to the camping / trailer stuff. Everything else looks good.
They're also making a different definition of camping in this local law than they have in the zoning law.
Exactly.
So 140-4, the definitions has different text than here. So like at the very least,
a massive problem for code enforcement.
That's a big problem. Yeah.
Yep.
And again, the section on camping in 140 specifically says you need a camping permit.
Yep.
It's 140-4 specific definitions camping. The use of a property as a site for sleeping outside, or the parking of travel trailers or similar equipment, the erection of tents or other shelters to serve as temporary residences.
So I'm gonna.
Are you saying if my grandkids come and I put tent outside, we cannot use it?
No, don't worry about that. That's
No
something.
one's gonna-
Okay,
Don't
okay,
worry
I'm trying
about
to.
it, okay?
I don't-
Everybody
Well,
don't
there's-
think about your grandkids. Just think about short-term rentals here. The reality is that no, you can't do a short-term.
Okay.
And yeah, that probably needs fixing also, but we're only
That
fixing.
probably needs fixing, yeah. Because it's too restrictive for camping. You should be allowed, your kids should be allowed, and your grandkids should be allowed to have a camp out in your yard.
Be able to
Yeah,
have,
doesn't make any sense.
exactly. Personal property right use should somehow be respected there, that you can do it. But what we need to do is that the camping here needs to be better defined as to what it is. It needs to be consistent with the rest of the code. Which goes back to everything Rick said on, we're saying yes in one place, no in another place, and not defining really, is it camping, not camping? What is what is your density? What is your not density?
Yeah, I think it's sorry, Mary. I think it's really important. Only having experience with this. I mean, if anyone's been to California, the Sierra Nevada festival that they have out there, people were camping on short-term rentals on people's lawns. It was a disaster, because it wasn't clearly stated. So if it is a short-term rental, it should be, I think it should be no camping, period. I mean, that's why you're renting the building, right? Why are you camping out there? So
that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It's because.
I mean, I think what we should, what I'll try to write something up and circulate to you guys saying, basically, we think this should go back the way it was before, no camping, because this is very hard to determine and define. And it's contradicting our existing laws. And we as a planning board think it should go back to no camping. No trailers, no camping, no boats. There's a guy that has a boat that he's up on boat, whatever, that he rents out. None of that. You need which goes right back to what I said at the beginning, that code enforcement says, if you want to rent something out, that's great. It needs a foundation with a well, with septic, so you have proper health, proper fire safety, proper everything safety. And these just go to another town if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Where they allow it.
It's because suddenly is opening a valve for, there is nothing now, and suddenly, camping and a house, everything.
Or you do a campground with the regulations we have for a campground and establish a good campground with all the campground. This is trying to do, like you said, Sam, something in between. You're trying to like squish between regular residents, regular short-term rentals, or bed and breakfast, and a campground. And once again, they're trying to have the cake and eat it too. So, all right, why don't I write something up and send it to everybody, and then send me comments and see if I captured the spirit. Feel free to mark it up like crazy at the basis, we don't want this. We think it skirts the two sides and the rest of our law. And if they really want to do it, then they really need to clarify a lot of definitions better.
Sounds good.
Did code enforcement officer was participating in writing this or consulted?
No, they tend to ax him out of all of it. At the beginning, he did, I think they do refer it and he's supposed to look at it, but it's a very good question, Zorian. I think it tends to get, the guy that does all the work tends to get axed out of the review. It's the same problem we have with this economic overlay. That's supposed to go back to code enforcement and have them weigh in on it. I bet it will be forgotten by the town board to send that back to code enforcement. Sometimes that, there's a following of the rules you want to follow and not following the rules you don't want to follow. Sometimes happens. All right, guys, do you think we can call it a night and I try to put something together and send it to you and everybody cuts it to pieces if I don't have the gist of what we're doing?
Just one other quick thing, Maren, it was what I mentioned on bed and breakfast. When you send the cover letter to the town, just kind of reiterate that, because there were a couple of public comments at the public hearing. Why don't we allow non-owner occupied bed and breakfasts?
Right.
And the reason for it is, well, we don't because it's state law.
Right.
Bed and breakfast is by definition a owner occupied, as opposed to these, which could be either owner occupied or non-owner occupied.
Right.
Or at least I think that's the way it works.
Yep, that's exactly.
Right. So
I know that Mike totally knows that, but some of the other, you're right, some of the other board members might not.
well, they might not know it, and it was mentioned once or twice in the public hearing, which is fine, but don't start extending the definition of B&Bs.
Well, they can't.
They can't.
Legally,
Right, yeah, right,
they
they can't.
absolutely can't.
Yeah.
So that was a good example of that. It was at Elm Rock when they wanted to turn it into from an inn into a B&B. They didn't have there wasn't owner occupied. So they basically changed their LLC to make the person who was the resident manager have shares within that bed and breakfast, so they could have, that person is on site, made it owner occupied. So they took the entity, made it an LLC and gave them a minority interest in it or otherwise the state wouldn't allow it.
Okay, well, there's always a loophole, I guess.
There is always a loophole, and I'll mention it.
Yeah, I can't see them doing that for a camper on somebody else's property, but good luck with that.
Well, no, for these are not bed and breakfast, so it doesn't apply. So here, you don't have to be owner occupied. This is the complaint that a lot of bed and breakfast people have, is they're doing the same kind of service, a small scale rooms to let, and they're under much more onerous state laws. This came up and became an entity in the new internet age, and they've been able to squish through, just like Uber has the same problems and is slowly being, Uber and Lyft shut down. We had this new quote unquote sharing gig economy come in, and it shot right through all of the rules. So now we're building the rules around it to try and treat everybody equitably. So that's why here they're limiting to 2% of the housing stock, non-owner occupied, whatchamacallit?
Short-term rental.
Short-term rental, thank you.
Resident, yeah.
So you're the resident, you can do it, but the ones that are, the last time this came through, there was somebody, he point blank said that he had bought 6 properties, was Airbnb-ing them all out. He might make our 2% hurdle right to this one guy. So that stops somebody coming in and buying up all the housing stock. You have no more affordable, you have less affordable housing, and they start renting it out as a small short-term transient rental lord. All right, I'll throw that in also, Rick. So hopefully I did nothing but write findings and starting decisions for this next meeting today. I'll hopefully get this out to you guys. We want to get to the planning board before their meeting, so in the next couple days, and so you guys can.
You mean town board?
Yeah, sorry, town board, yeah. So we can get it to them by the end of this week or beginning of next week, so they have it for their meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
Guys? Thank you. That wasn't our fastest, but it wasn't bad. Do
Okay.
I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstain? All right, have a good night, guys.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you.
Aye.